that need work. And self-care can help you do that, for sure. When you really make self-care a priority, and when you really start to live your life from a place of, how do I put that oxygen mask on myself first and then attend to anybody else on the plane? When that becomes your default reasoning, your default way of being, you start to really develop such a true power that no one can take from you. No one can ever manipulate it out of you. And the more you use it, the more people around you will notice it, and the manipulative narcissists will kind of catch on to that, and they'll be like, oops, that person's not one we can control. And you'll start to repel people like that. As you start to make self-care the priority, as you start advocating for your own well-being, watch as all the toxic people start dropping like flies. They can't stand it. It's like repellent. So I want to give you guys some examples of what it means to advocate for your own self-care. I think we've talked about enough about like what it is, but I want to give you some real life examples so that you can apply this to what's going on right now. Well, the first example of how you can advocate for your own self-care is within your relationships. So this could be with a spouse or a parent. And again, I want to point out that when you start advocating for your own self-care, do beware of the narcissists in your life that are going to resist this heavily. So in our relationships, advocating for your own self-care looks like standing up for yourself and telling the other person, what you will and will not accept. That's a part of advocating for yourself. In any relationship, whether it's a spouse, a parent, your children, whomever you're in a relationship with, advocating for yourself looks like telling those other people, this is how you will treat me. You're teaching them how to treat you. You're asking for what you need, and you're being honest, even when it's really challenging, especially those really difficult conversations that we need to have with our spouses or our kids or our family members to let them know what they're doing is not okay. It's usually easier to spot what the other person is doing to us than it is to spot what we're doing that allows them to treat us like that. And that's where the tricky work gets. You have to decipher what it is they're doing, how it is that affects you, and then how you go about taking responsibility for allowing them. So, okay, a real life example of that is, let's say your wife really wants pizza for dinner, but you've been trying to eat healthy and pizza is not on your plan. And advocating for your own self-care looks like, honey, you can go have pizza. I'm going to have a salad. I'm going to stick to what I planned on doing today. I know that sounds really simple and really basic, but that is advocating for your own self-care. When you don't give in to somebody else's opinions or wants of what you should be doing. Another example is in your health, in your well-being, and that includes your mental health. And I know a lot of people struggle with advocating for their own health. I know so many examples of people that are in poor health that even have health insurance, they have access, but they don't make their health a priority. They don't go to a doctor for regular checkups. They don't figure out what kind of mental health services are available to them. And a huge part of mental health issues is not being able to get to the place where you can ask for help. And of course, a lot of people are dealing with not having health insurance at all. But when I talk about advocating for your own health, first of all, it means coming from the position that you believe you deserve to have good health. Second of all, it comes from the position of believing that you deserve services, good services, and that your health and your mental health is important, and it's worth making the doctor's appointments. It's worth checking out whatever resources are available through your employer or through community groups, or even on Instagram. You can find all kinds of self-help stuff and start filling your feed full of positivity that's going to make you feel better about yourself instead of comparing yourself to the $1 million mansions you'll never own. And it also looks like when you do make those health appointments that you make sure that the doctor is hearing you. I know a lot of my friends of color have expressed that when they go to the doctor for certain things, the doctors don't always listen to them. And so it's really important that if that's a challenge for you, if you've come up against that, they don't take you seriously, that you really make it a priority to find somebody who will listen to you and keep squawking until you get the health care and the mental health care that you deserve. Another example of advocating for your own self-care, it comes at work. I want you to really think about this. Do you stand up for yourself at your job? Do you ask for raises? Do you work more hours than you're scheduled? And do you live at work? Those are examples of not advocating for yourself at work. And I think in our hyper-capitalistic society, everyone has been brainwashed to think, we work for them, they can treat us like crap. And that is not the truth. You do not have to settle for being treated like garbage because they give you a paycheck. You are in a transactional experience with your employer. You are giving them your efforts and they are giving you pay. And if they are not treating you well, that is separate from that transaction. And you have to be able to stand up for yourself. If you're unemployed and you don't have a job right now, you still have to stand up for yourself and advocate for yourself like a badass when it comes to getting a new job. You have to be able to negotiate on your own behalf for all of the things that you deserve in a good employer. And it's so important that you build these skills outside of the working environment, because when you do become employed or when you do take that next step in your job, you will come up against resistance and you are going to have to advocate for yourself, especially us women. There are so many times when we just accept what's given to us because that is our nature, rather than advocating for what we deserve. And sometimes that feels like we're being combative, but the truth is that is an act of self-care. My other example of standing up for yourself is with your kids. Now, this is a great example for my mommies out there who are dealing with mom guilt. Standing up to your kids can sound like a pretty foreign concept. And I think my mommies out there who deal with, raising their kids and taking care of their kids on a consistent basis really struggle with this, especially if your kids have already been conditioned to walk all over you. And that's something I really want to take a minute and talk about. Now, I'm not a mom myself, but I know enough moms to know that there are a lot of dynamics with kids where kids learn either from the other parent or from society or from whatever behavioral training they have or haven't had, that they can walk all over mommy. That mommy is their personal servant. That mommy will make them sandwiches if they don't like the cereal they've been given or whatever. And more often than not, moms beat themselves up when they do try to stand up to their kids because they feel like they've done something wrong that their kid is treating them like that. Now, again, I'm not a mom, so I can't really give anybody some real practical advice from experience, but I can tell you this. It's the same across the board. I treat children like adults. I talk to them like they're adults. I treat them with respect. I listen to what they say. And most of the time, kids respond really well to that. And that's what I would encourage my mommies out there to do, is to really start treating your kid like an adult and training them to treat you the way you want to be treated. Meaning if you need them to go in the other room so that you can have a timeout, you have to be able to stand up to them and be consistent and follow through with that every time you need that time to yourself, which I know is painstakingly hard and a lot of work. And when you're tired, it just isn't always feasible. But it is worth trying again and again and again. Now, the last example I want to talk about of when we advocate or when we should be advocating for our own self-care is with our friend groups or within peer pressure. And I think that this is probably the safest example for you to test out advocating for yourself. Because typically your friends, if you've done well in choosing good people to surround yourself with, will respond really well to you standing up for yourself and advocating for yourself. Hell, they might even cheer you on. When I talk about this, I specifically mean that if you have a friend group that, you've got a friend who's asking for your attention, they're asking for your help, they're asking for your resources, you have to be able to advocate for your own self-care and your own well-being by responding honestly to them. And I want to say this real quickly, that if your friendship is hinging on whether or not you help that person or not, you're getting into really tricky, dirty water. Because your friendship should be based on your mutual respect and love and want to hang out with each other, not what you can give each other or what you have that fixes the other person's problem. So it's really important that when you have friend groups, when you have peer groups, that you're able to set your own boundaries within them. Meaning, if you don't want to go to the social event, that doesn't mean you're not still a part of the group, etc., etc. All right, I want to run through that list really quick. Just some examples of advocating for your self-care in relationships. That includes your spouse, your parents, your kids. Number 2, in your health. That includes your physical health, your mental health. Number 3, at work. That's a really good place to advocate for yourself. Number 4, specifically with your children. I know that's a difficult thing to ask, but really, if you try it and you make it consistent, that can change everything. And lastly, with your friend groups, your peer groups. All right, so we've been through why it's important to advocate for ourselves. We've been through some examples of where and when it's appropriate to advocate for our self-care. And now we're going to talk about the actual how, all right? The actual, how do I stand up for myself? How do I advocate for my own self-care? How do I ask for what I need? First of all, you just got to start asking for permission. So, with your spouse, with your friends, things like that, it just looks like, hey, I want a weekend to myself. When's a good time for me to do that? Or with your parents, it can be, I'm not up for Christmas this year with COVID and everything like that. What's something else we can do? What's another way we can do this? So posing that question, asking that permission to whomever is, in your opinion, preventing you from getting the self-care you want. It really does come down to asking for what you want. And it's actually easier, I think, to ask for what you want from other people than it is to ask yourself for that permission. And you might be thinking, like, why do I need to ask myself for permission? Well, the truth is, if you're listening to this podcast, and if self-care is something that's elusive to you, it's probably because you haven't given yourself the permission to do self-care. You haven't said to yourself, you know what? I value you enough. I love you enough. I want you to do what you want to do. And it's okay. And I know it's a kind of a funny concept, but it's really something I want us to all practice doing, is asking ourselves and really digging deep and figuring out, how do I get what I need from myself? Another way to advocate for ourselves is setting the standard. Now, setting the standard for yourself is really actually very simple. It's about knowing where you stand and what you will and will not accept. So I want to give you a tangible example of this. Let's say you're in a conversation with somebody and they're clearly not respecting you and they keep talking over you. And it happens multiple times. It's not just an accident. It's like how this person is with you. And setting the standard for yourself is not engaging in conversation with them, is telling them point blank, you keep interrupting me. You're not respecting what I have to say. And setting the standard to that person is saying, if you talk like this to me, if you keep talking over me, I'm not going to engage with you. Now, all of that is a lot of combative language that a lot of us who have a hard time with self-care, we get real uncomfortable when that kind of language pops up. We don't like to make other people feel bad. But the truth is, you have to choose between you or them when it comes to this kind of thing. And when it comes to how people are going to treat you, you have to set that standard. Because if you allow a narcissist or somebody who thinks they're better than you to treat you like garbage, you allowed it. So guess what? They're going to think it's okay. And they're going to do it over and over and over again. And as you start to break that pattern, look for mega resistance. They're not going to like it. Nobody likes when you stand up for yourself if you've been a doormat for years.